Today, we are joined by Representative Tommy Pope, incumbent member in House District 47, representing York County. Thanks for joining us, Representative Pope.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. We want to start by letting our members get to know you a little bit. So if you would, tell me a little bit about your personal and professional background and how that shapes your view on education.
Sure. So I was born here in Rock Hill. Mother was a school teacher. My father was a police officer. Actually, Mom had gone back to Winthrop to go to school, and she was pregnant with me at the time. So we joked that I went to Winthrop, for an educational degree before I went to kindergarten. And so I grew up here in Leslie, graduated Rock Hill High. Actually went off to Carolina to school down in Columbia, and spent about 10 years down there. I worked at the state law enforcement division, ended up ultimately going to law school down there too. Moved back home when I was 29, went to work at the sheriff's office and ended up running for solicitor. So I was, that was back before my hair was gray. So I was the youngest solicitor back then. So that's kind of been my life career. My brother, my sister, both my sisters, mother were all in education. Daddy and I were in law enforcement. Dad, went to World War II, didn't graduate high school, and mother, of course, had advanced degrees from Winthrop. Daddy was quick to say the dumb ones ended up in law enforcement. So I guess that's how I ended up being a police officer and a law enforcement officer.
I'd say the ones with the big heart for the community end up in law enforcement. But with a family of educators, you know what a teacher's life is like. And in South Carolina, one challenge we're facing right now is a teacher shortage crisis. We've got thousands of teachers leaving the classroom, leaving hundreds of empty classrooms to start school years. So in your view, what steps does the General Assembly need to take in the coming session to address teacher recruitment and retention?
Well, it kind of ties into, we were talking about the life experience, and you said, that law enforcement's kind of a calling. What, the pro and con as I see it, so is education. The folks that got into education didn't get into it, kind of same with law enforcement, thinking, that it's going to, you're going to make your first million, but you're doing it because you're involved or care about the kids or care about the community. And I think that's one thing. And again, unfortunately, we're seeing it with teachers, we're seeing it with law enforcement too. For whatever reason, we always neglect to compensate those that do it for a calling. You don't see law enforcement getting, compensated. You don't see pastors, you don't see teachers. And so one thing that is probably, when I say the simplest, it's easy to talk about, it's harder to get done, it's just a compensation issue. I think that's something we can tackle in the legislature. Before COVID, with the bonus money we had this year, this was probably the best opportunity. And, actually in the House bill, the House budget, we actually did, bring the raises up. But, at the end of the day, even if we had done those raises, that's not what I perceive as the bigger problem, which to me is in the classroom. This is, unfortunately, I don't know how much legislature can fix this. The environment, when I talk to family members or talk to teachers in the classroom, it used to be the buck stopped with the teacher and the teacher had control of their classroom. And now, whether you blame it on the lawyers or, whatever, the teachers are afraid and the schools are afraid to teach. And I think there's been a societal shift. We don't want you just to teach my children. We want you to raise my children. And I think that the tough thing, that's a burden for anybody. We were joking before we came on the air about our own family. It's all I could do with just one 17-year-old daughter left in the house. And so we're asking these teachers to do more than I think they really signed up for, so to speak. And so going back to what I think we can do, I think we can do better with their educational paths, whether it be grants, in the prosecution world, again, I see a lot of parallels. We worked hard on some loan forgiveness, for people, because I would have people come and want to be prosecutors, and then they just couldn't make their student loan payment and still have an apartment or whatever. So I think there's some opportunities there. I think things like class size and things that keep teachers from being overwhelmed, there's things we can do on that level. By the same token, it starts in a classroom, and it starts with those individual victories. But I think what's happening, those individual victories for those teachers are getting overwhelmed by the massive defeats, whether it's not being able to teach, and and I hate to say it, that's more of a societal issue that probably we're going to knock out here in a minute.
Well, since you mentioned pay, if it's all right, I'd just like to ask you an extension question on that. Chairman Smith has said that he's committed to retroactively funding teacher step increases in January if revenues are stable. What's your position on that topic?
Yeah, I absolutely support that. It was a difficult call, there was a lot of pressure to do it, but I think fiscally we did the right thing. There's a lot of folks, our law firm's done some strange things, distance wise and other things to deal with the dip. There's a lot of people that lost jobs. We're blessed. We didn't lose our jobs. A lot of the teachers hadn't lost their jobs. And so I know that the step increase is exactly that, a step. But I feel comfortable that you'll see it. Again, what I'm more hopeful for is that we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the other budget things we did from the last budget come through. I think that is important. But I think the step increase, to me, politically and legislatively and fiscally is an easier lift. Now, of course, that takes us, I don't want to steal your questions, but that takes us to the bigger issue, I think, which is educational funding across the board.
Yeah, let's move into that, because educational funding, we haven't reformed our funding formula since the 70s, but we've had issues with funding, the state Supreme Court talking about what is adequate and what is not. So in your view, what does the General Assembly need to do to update our funding system to align to what students need in the year 2020?
I always tell people I'm not naive, but I am idealistic. So what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. I've worked on tax reform for the 10 years that I've been here, and always we're going to do it next year. I will tell you a couple things. When I first took office, I sat down with Vernon Prosser, who was the superintendent up in York at the time, and he said, "I'll be glad to talk to you all about the educational formula." And I'm a fairly intelligent guy, I think, but when the smoke cleared, I knew about the EFA and the EIA and the EIEIO and everything. If it's Tuesday, you get this, and we make the schools do this by offering them this, and that's one aspect I think is tremendously messed up. Even though I recognize, for example, you may need more money allocated to a special needs child or something, by the same token, when we grade teachers, so to speak, on their progress, the special needs child that stayed in his desk and wrote his name may have made more progress than the teacher in advanced placement class. So I recognize that, but I think from a pure funding standpoint, we need to simplify the formula. And, and this is where it gets always laughed with the question. If the question says vouchers, it means you're against money following the child. If you say money follows the child, you're for it. But I think we need to allocate the money. I remember when I first took office, or was running for office, and I'd get an email. And if it was, a pro-public education group, the public student only gets $2,000. And if it was the angry Tea Party folks, they get $12,000. Dire Straits has a song said, "Two men say they're Jesus, one of them must be wrong." So it's kind of the same thing, so I think we need to know a true number, and then we need to make it work. Now it gets deeper, because how are we going to fund that number? We don't want to punish, and I'm very blessed. I'm in York County. We really don't know what a bad school is comparatively, so, and we're blessed financially up here. We've got to find a way to fund. Several years ago, the superintendents had a proposal that would have done like a statewide meal. Now, as a Republican, that's blasphemy to me, say, taxes. But, where we're really messed up, and this is my work on taxes, we need lower, flatter, fair, broader taxes, but taxes that meet our needs. And so what I had always envisioned in that regard, if you had a statewide meal, so you could help deal with the Abbeville situations and the corridor of shame, but set it up such that, here in York County, we voted a penny for roads, penny for progress. Don't punish the people that want to fund. York County will fund law enforcement. York County will fund education. And so you don't want to punish that, but you need to set up that mechanism. The other thing that frustrates me is, and again, I've been down there 10 years, maybe I'm part of the problem, not the solution. It drives me crazy that we decide sometimes we're going to meet the number. One, I want a real number, but number two, we're going to meet it or we're not, because we're the great and powerful legislature. We can do whatever we want. Well, if we do whatever we want, why do we quit having this false number that allows people to feel like we're not reaching it? Let's find a real number. So I'm hopeful, as you saw last year, and again, I keep jumping your questions, with the educational bill, they always talk about legislature being sausage being made. When we tackled ethics reform, we did it both ways. We had the mega bill with everything in it, and we had the individual bills. Well, the truth is the individual bills got more traction, but that I can guarantee you, with all due respect to Senator Fanning or whoever rails against something, if I'd have drafted that teacher bill, I'm sure it'd have been different too. If each one, but you're getting this amalgam of folks from different views, and I hate to say it makes for some ugly products sometimes.
Well, sure, and so since you brought up S419, the mega bill, to use your term, that didn't get over to the House before COVID shut things down. So that issue of universal reform or comprehensive reform is likely to come up again, especially since that's a very important priority for Speaker Lucas. So if that was your bill, or if that was your issue, you've mentioned some of the things in S419 already, things like extended grants or scholarships for education majors, reducing class sizes. But what do you view as the essentials in that mega bill that need to progress forward out of this reform effort that the General Assembly has been engaged in?
I think, and it really loops all the way back around to what we talked about for teachers. I think what is more attainable is we're, and again, this comes from my life experience too. I was one of 16 solicitors. A solicitor down in Hampton said we were 16 prima donnas, but I'll leave that one alone. But each circuit runs a little bit differently. I wish whatever we did that it was wrapped in flexibility to let the best teacher, we laud our teachers of the year right before we snatch them out of the classroom and send them in a BMW around the state for a year, what I mean? But we recognize thinking outside the box. We recognize creativity. Unfortunately, and again, maybe it's the nature of the beast with legislation, but when we dictate, Columbia, the same thing we blame Washington on, we can't quite let go of the strings, and so we try to tell you how you're going to do it in Barnwell instead of letting you do it in Barnwell. And in some places, you see the Department of Education has had to take over some places. I get that, but so kind of backing up, if I could do, if I had the lamp with the three wishes, one of them would take us back to the classroom environment and whatever it took to make that a teachable teaching environment. And again, I don't know that legislation can change that. I don't know that every teacher can change that. I spent a lot of time, particularly in my prosecution days, going to the high schools. And, you speaking to the groups and telling about my life experience or television trial experience and all that different stuff. And, when it got to the point I was at the advanced placement classes and half the kids were asleep and half the kids were doing this, at some point I'm thinking, and I'm not a teacher paid to be, I'm thinking I got somewhere better I could be. So I don't know that legislation can change that part. So backing out, what I think we can do is try to make that environment better and then compensate our teachers for basically the equivalent of hazardous duty pay.
One other question I've got that spins off something you mentioned earlier when we were talking funding formula. You mentioned vouchers. And we know that school choice is a priority for Governor McMaster. He had a safe grants program out of federal dollars that the state Supreme Court has invalidated. But the governor said he wants to see the legislature establish a permanent version of something similar to safe grants, whether you call it scholarships, vouchers, but some sort of public funding for private school choice. So if the governor comes with that as a priority in his state of the state for the coming year, what's your position on that topic?
Well, I support school choice. And the reason I do, I've experienced my own family. I've had everything from the boys going to Blessed Hope Christian School and then rolling into public school and kind of every combination. And so, and again, we've been blessed with a structured family and you know, a background that values education, but I want every family to have as much flexibility as possible. I will say, when I got to the legislature, again, with my background, I thought finally, you know, at least on education, it's something we could all agree on. You know, I thought, you know, when I got to Columbia, and the battles we have, you know, I don't see a demarcation public school versus private school if we're really talking about the kids. Because to me, what unfortunately seems to happen, because I think there are really people at both ends. There's people who want to leave it just like it was or just like it is. You know, public school was good enough for me. I always laugh at a lot less history to learn back when I was in public school. But, you know, but public school is good enough for me. It's good enough for everybody. Or private school. And there are people that feel strongly about private school or homeschooling. There are clearly those that want to undermine the other side, you know, rather than make it work. But one thing I think, in looking at Rock Hill as an example, the alternatives that we have in public school here, I think would have never happened. You know, it's left me when they're learning, doing their math or science in French, for example, you know, at some of the magnet schools, or those were created, I think, somewhat for the push for choices. Now they've done that within the construct of the public school. And so kind of looping back around to your question, I think the mistake we make it a battle to take money away. To me, if we could clean up the funding mechanism like we were talking earlier, have a real number, and again, I know it doesn't work, every child's not the same, but you say all children are start out with $10,000. I'm just making up a number. It's not perfect because you have overhead. You got to turn the lights on the school if you got 10 people or you got 1,000 kids, you know, but at least that would be a start. Most of the frustration I get in Columbia, whether it's working on taxes or otherwise, about I didn't see that. It must be in Latin where it says leave your common sense at the door, because truly, you know, the real art of compromise, which you know, compromise is a bad word in politics, but the real art of compromise in any situation, I said, anybody that's been on a church committee knows we can't even agree. We're all Christians. We can't agree what color to paint the gym, you know. But in the legislature, if we could find these things, I think the mistake the governor made, to me, was it was too specific about one thing to make a statement instead of let's fix the bigger problem. And then the beauty is more people will want to stay at public school, but you know, if you really care about a kid, if your mom's going to start teaching you and that's going to do better for you, I hate you're leaving my classroom because you contribute a lot, but I wish you nothing but success. You know, that's, I think it's really in most teachers' hearts, true teachers that are called for it. I think, unfortunately, we made it my team versus your team. And so that's why I always tease. I said from the beginning, if you say vouchers, you don't have to tell me where you stand, you know, and likewise, if I say school choice.
Sure. Yeah. So much of it gets caught in, are you calling it educational freedom, choice, voucher,
Right.
like finding the buzzwords.
Right.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground on educational policy, but I want to make sure our members know about your top priorities. So is there anything we haven't covered that you want to make sure a group of teachers knows about you?
You know, I found that my best experience, you know, with helping teachers is, you know, when they contact me. And I don't know that, you know, I don't know, as we said earlier, any legislator can fix some of the things we're dealing with. Because again, without getting on my soapbox, I think a lot of them are societal. I used to see as the prosecutor, you know, the old, if they're not reading by 4th grade, they're probably going to see Solicitor Pope before it's over. And it's not that they're bad kids. It's because, I mean, the reason they're acting out is because they're embarrassed because they really can't read what you're saying on the board. And so I've always seen a value. I remember one time when I first ran, they were talking about 4K and 3K. And I got through speaking and I said, I support all these things. And when the Republican guys in the audience stood up, you know, you sound like a Democrat, Pope. Why are you saying that? And I said, well, here's the deal. He said, you were the prosecutor. He said, the parents ought to be raising these kids. I said, absolutely, I agree, but they're not. And so if they're not, here's our two choices. We just keep saying whose fault it was, or we try to give the teachers the tools and give the kids, because I think getting educated makes everybody happier in the classroom. You know, I mean, there's always the exception, but if I'm getting it, then I want to show you that I'm getting it. If I'm not, I'm probably acting up or asking to go to the bathroom or whatever I can do to clear out. But if we can do those things to make that educational experience better, we win as a society. And I may be a Republican, but I'd sure rather pay extra money to educate all those kids and not see them on the criminal justice end.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to share with our members this afternoon. We appreciate your continued service to the state. We wish you the best. And if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate your time. Take care.
Yes, sir. You too.